Hey, my friends, it's Dave Slomka, and welcome to a new episode of Dave's I Believe in You. Every 2 weeks, I release another podcast where you can find expert guidance from the sources that I've been learning from and a community of people like yourself who want to grow and change. So let me be your encourager. With God, your life can be better. You can change. Your best days are still ahead of you. I believe in you. If you are finding these podcasts helpful, then hit that like button or give me some stars. Leave a comment. If you're on social media, then be sure to tag me or DM me at Dave Slomka so that I can say hi. I would love to hear from you. Let me encourage you to listen closely. Maybe take some notes so you remember the insights of personal growth from what we talk about. And then share this podcast with 3 friends and help them grow. Help them move forward in their lives and make a difference in our world. And with that, let's get started. If you're anything like me, then being subjected to bad leadership frustrates you. Even having to watch poor leadership from a distance can make your temperature rise and you start to get worked up. It's funny how seeing things being poorly led and the often disastrous consequences can move us at an emotional level. But the truth is that the leadership we are exposed to the most in our lives is not anyone around us, it's actually ourselves. We lead ourselves every day, and it's the leadership with the biggest impact on us. That means if it's done poorly, it should really bother us. But we don't often think about self-leadership. What if we start to take self-leadership as seriously as the leadership of the people who are around us? Imagine how your life could be better. Last time I mentioned that we'd be looking at Donald Miller's podcast, but I'm going to actually postpone that so I can do a little bit more research into his new book first. So instead, in this podcast, we're going to look at the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast and his 2 episodes about self-leadership. And today we're going to cover part 1. I appreciate Andy. He is an amazing and thoughtful leader, and he provides some fantastic insights. He's a communicator, author, and pastor, and he founded the Atlanta-based North Point Ministries back in 1995. Now today, North Point Ministries consists of 8 churches in the Atlanta area and a network of 180 churches around the globe. He's the author of more than 20 books, including Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, Irresistible, Enemy of the Heart, When Work and Family Collide, and Visioneering. The last one I'm just finishing up now, and it has been amazing. I love how Andy begins this podcast about self-leadership. He says, I have participated in every bad decision I have ever made. Like, what an insightful and terrible thought. He points out that it's a long list. For every bad decision or poor choice that I have made, I am the common denominator. Now, of course, everyone else has done the same, right? That's true for you too. We have been the agents of our own financial and parenting, relational, spiritual, and any other bad decisions in our lives. So Andy points out that we are the mastermind behind every one of our greatest regrets. Now that insight should help us to realize how important self-leadership is and the incredible direct impact it has on our lives. Now, but Andy goes on to give 3 reasons why self-leadership is so important. The first is interesting and might not seem to apply to everyone, but you'll remember that we are all leaders because leadership is influence, and you influence the people around you all the time, but maybe not in the ways that you hope. So reason number 1 is that you won't be a leader worth following if you don't lead yourself. Now, we all know leaders who are not well self-led, and we follow them because we have to, not because we want to. We may like things about those leaders, but we don't want to be like them. This starts at home with mom and dad and how well they led themselves. Whether you want to be like your mother or your father has less to do with what they said and more to do with how they led themselves. Now that is a powerful statement. We want to be like them, not because they taught us well, but because they modeled it well. Now, living life well gets respect. And the same is true of leadership. To be a leader worthy of following requires that you lead yourself well. Number 2 is exceptional self-leadership is the key to sustained influence. It's not authority, it's influence. You can have authority because of a title or a position, but not have influence. You have to be a leader worth following. Influence is about respect that goes beyond the title. And Andy points out that we rarely open ourselves up to the influence of people we don't respect. Now, we may do what they ask us to do because of their position in our lives. But in terms of being able to influence, we do that with people that we have respect for. And we respect people who lead themselves well. I think that's a filter that I often use for myself and the people around me. Are they leading themselves well? Am I leading myself well? And if not, then some of the credibility goes down for me, for those people and for myself too. It's not about perfection, but you need to be able to lead yourself well. The third point is self-leadership is the key to sustained performance. Leaders get taken out or they burn out because of poor self-leadership. It's usually not a talent or a skill issue. It's generally a personal issue. And then great leaders last because they lead themselves first. Now, Andy gives a quote from Clay Scroggins, who is a part of his church as well, and his book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And I'll link to that in the notes. And he says this, you don't have to be in charge to take charge of leading yourself. Self-leadership is your primary responsibility as a leader. And I would say that self-leadership is primary for all of us to live life well and to become who God created us to be. The idea is that self-leadership begins every morning. And if I can keep myself on the right path and straightened out, going where I need to go, everything else will pretty much follow. Andy then gives us 3 decisions to make for good self-leadership. And we're going to look at the first today, and then we're going to look at the other 2 in our next podcast. And the first one is really enough for today because it is a tough one. And it's this. Number 1 is, I will not lie to myself even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. Now, Andy's comment was that this is perhaps the most important one and also the most difficult one because our culture tells us that pretty much the worst thing that can happen is for us to feel bad about ourselves or even worse, for our children to feel bad about themselves. So we don't want people to feel bad about themselves. We don't want our kids to feel bad about themselves. But really, the worst thing is to hold on to something bad about yourself because I'm not willing to acknowledge it. That's the thing we should fear more. That through deceiving ourselves, we actually hold on to destructive ideas or limiting behaviors. Great self-leadership requires that we be brutally honest with ourselves. And if we can't be honest with ourselves, then we are never going to move past the things that hold us back or that are wrong about ourselves. So to lead others well, you need to know strengths and weaknesses about them and actually play to those strengths and weaknesses. Right? We have to be honest with the people around us about their strengths and their weaknesses so they can get better and improve. Well, the same is true for us. Andy points out that it's often more difficult to be honest with ourselves than it is with the people around us. Sometimes even repeating hurtful things about ourselves or, beating yourself up internally is actually a way that we lie to ourselves. Because the easiest person to deceive is the person you see in the mirror. Nobody does a better job selling me on bad ideas than me. And when it comes to sales, you are a sucker to you. As soon as you see something that you want, what do? You start selling yourself on it. We have all purchased things because we sold ourselves before we even got to the store. Right? Sometimes a good salesman will actually keep quiet because they can see that we're actually selling ourselves. They don't even have to say anything. Now, I can think of so many times when I sold myself on things and I didn't want to stop and think too much about them because I wanted to convince myself. Maybe you can relate to that. But you can't lead yourself well as long as you're lying to yourself. So the beginning of good self-leadership is to be completely honest with yourself. Andy then gives a simple but powerful question to ask when you want to be honest with yourself. You need to stop and ask, why am I doing this? And then pause, really. Dig beneath the surface answer to what is really going on underneath. And then he gives an example. He says, for those of you who do not like confrontation and you like to avoid, when somebody calls and you see that name pop up on your phone, but you don't answer it and you're telling yourself, really, I'm too busy, you need to be honest with yourself about why you're avoiding. And when you own the truth and you actually admit it to yourself, you actually take some of that negative energy that you're building up in your mind and it begins to dissipate. And instead, you can deal with it and experience that weight being lifted off your shoulders. Now, of course, you won't change if you lie to yourself. You have to know the truth. Another example is if you are someone who likes to deal with things and your inclination is to get on the phone or walk down the hall and deal with something and maybe sometimes be too direct. Now, why? You're telling yourself, I'm doing this because I love efficiency, or I'm doing this because I love it when things are done on time. But what's really behind it all? Maybe I'm just being impatient, or maybe I just didn't get my way. And so before you hit send, before you walk over or make that call, find out what's really behind your decision. Get to the truth. That's what good self-leadership is all about. It's at least acknowledging what's going on instead of telling yourself a story. Own the truth about what's going on in your head and in your heart. And a good way to do that is to hit that pause button on the action you are about to take and really reflect on why are you doing it before you actually make more trouble for yourself and probably for other people. You need to begin with self-leadership that says, I will not lie to myself even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. In 2 weeks, we're going to look at the last 2 decisions that make for good self-leadership. And this is so foundational to our growth that you don't want to miss it, because you and I can deceive ourselves and continue on with our dysfunctions and not be who God wants us to be. And so check out the podcast in 2 weeks to learn more. Until then, if you want more detailed notes, go to daveslomka.com and you can subscribe there. And then make sure to share the episode with 3 people. Let's share the encouragement around and show others that we believe in them too. There are people in your life who want to make a change in their lives. They want to make a difference in our world. And so support them in their journey by sharing this podcast. Please leave a comment or a review. It is a big help to me. Every day is a good day to grow and change. I believe in you. With God in your life, anything is possible. So go out there and make that change.